It's Chris Clegg. I'm going to moderate this panel discussion, but I'm looking forward to a really great discussion here as we have Lance Brozdowski and Jack Mueller. Sorry, I'll say that right. Nick, correct. I'll be right on that. So let's just go around and introduce ourselves, and then we will kind of dive in on the topic. So Lance, I think a lot of people know you do great work, but go ahead and introduce yourself and who you are.
Yeah, appreciate that. My name's Lance. I work as a player development analyst for Marquee Sports Network, which is the Chicago Cubs regional sports network. And I have my own brand and a variety of spots. I started doing some short form content last year, YouTube channel, trying to grow that. But yeah, I love pitching and I love digging into data.
Yeah, Lance does awesome videos, great data dives. If you don't follow him, you certainly should be. So check that out. Jack, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I've been working in baseball for the last 4 years. I'm currently a senior at Miami University, finishing up my degree in sport management and journalism. In the past, I've worked as a scouting intern and analytics intern for the Orleans Firebirds on the Cape Cod League and for the Chicago Dogs in the American Association. So super excited to jump into this conversation. Super excited to be talking with you guys. And yeah.
That's awesome. And my name's Chris Clegg. I'm the founder of the Dynasty Dugout, do Dynasty and prospect content, and also on the Toolshed podcast as well. But we're here to talk about some pitching prospects today, as we've kind of hinted at. Basically looking at pitching prospects to target for redraft leagues. Who should you know? Last year, we had an incredible year of pitching prospects that made their debuts. And this year, who's left? Because we did see a ton of guys graduate. But I wanted to kind of start out this discussion by just talking about the changing landscape of pitching prospects and promotions themselves, as we saw and have seen teams be more aggressive with the prospect promotion incentive. Teams have been aggressively pushing their prospects more and more. We saw that last year with a record number of top prospects that debuted. And this year, I think that trend will continue. But I'd like to kind of go around and talk a little bit about that and what we expect this year. So, Lance, go ahead. I want to hear your thoughts on that, as we've seen more aggressive promotions. Obviously, you working kind of closely with the Cubs, you have some insight there as far as maybe some of those things. And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think off the top of my head, my initial reaction is that I don't know if it applies as strongly to pitching prospects, just because I feel like the ability for them to win Rookie of the Year is a slightly steeper path, especially if that organization is perhaps trying to coddle their innings a bit to the point where they won't be able to amass WAR or whatever statistic you want to pull to actually win a Rookie of the Year award. So I almost feel like it incentivizes teams to maybe bring up position players a little bit earlier. Like, I mean, we're seeing drafts like Wyatt Langford, Jackson Holiday, like those guys, even like a Dylan Cruz. He's not going as high as those others from what I've seen redraft prices so far. But I do feel like those guys, Churio as well, like chance to start opening day and accumulate enough to win a Rookie of the Year. I don't know if it applies as strongly to pitching. I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts. That's just my initial impression, though.
I do think that's a good point. I'd like to hear, Jack, your thoughts, but I do kind of agree. We typically see hitters winning that Rookie of the Year award, so it's a much lower probability for an arm. But Jack, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think Lance kind of touched on it. I think that teams just need more pitchers now than ever. Pitchers aren't throwing 200 innings like they were 10, 15 years ago. You see guys more in the 140, 130 range. So you need prospects to eat those innings. And I think that's why teams have been a little more aggressive with getting guys to the big leagues. I don't think it's, like Lance said, I don't think it's a whole lot to do with the incentive, but I think it's more that teams just need guys to eat these innings, and they're talented enough to do it.
I also think, like, from my perspective, I think that with the advancement in data that we have, I think you can see like younger pitchers just having stuff that can compete against major league hitters. And so from that standpoint, I think that you see orgs be a little more aggressive with some pitchers, just because why would we waste the bullets in the minors, especially with injuries? I would say injuries are typically on the rise with pitching. We see more injuries on that front. Guys are throwing harder. There's more injuries. And why do teams want to waste that talent in the minors when they can have those guys they believe in and make the majors and compete at a high level against these hitters? We saw it some last year. AJ Smith-Shawver was one that started the year in high A, pushed to the majors within a couple of months. And I actually saw Alex Anthopoulos at a Gwinnett game when Shawver was made a single start there before he got the call up. And so, Alex Anthopoulos is going to hold things close to his chest. We know about him as a GM, but I tried to get a couple nuggets out of him. And he straight up told me, he said, we believe that his talent and what he brings to the table is as good as anybody here in AAA and maybe even at the major league level. And surely enough, that start was on a Friday. That next Tuesday, he was called up to Atlanta. So I think with the advancements in data, we can see different traits that work for arms, and every arm's different and unique. So that obviously matters. But I think that from that standpoint too, we can certainly see pitchers push a little faster because teams can just see what works and what could work against major league talent. So last year, kind of hit on it. We had a pretty special class, I would say, of pitching prospects that debuted. We had Grayson Rodriguez, Bobby Mueller, Taj Bradley, Mason Miller, Tanner Bybee, Gavin Williams, Gavin Stone. The list just goes on and on and on. So that question leaves us today. What we're going to discuss is who is left? Which pitching prospects should we be targeting in redraft leagues that can come up, that can provide value? Maybe they make their team out of camp. We'll see. But we have a list of kind of the big targets, and we're all going to go like individualized with a couple of deeper targets here. So the first name to discuss was Paul Skeens. I think everybody knows who Paul Skeens is at this point. Drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates, one of the best collegiate arms we've seen in some time out of LSU. Can Paul Skeens debut this year? Can he break camp with the Pirates? That may be crazy to think, but we've seen some aggressiveness. They pushed him to Double-A last year. What do you guys think? Lance, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a chance he makes it up this year. The angle I'm going to take here is to give you kind of more of the overview of what he throws and what I kind of think of some of the shapes and stuff. And then I'm hoping Jack can piggyback on that. And I don't know, do whatever angle you want. Jack, I figured I'd just make my angle a little more specific to help people out. But Skeens is weird. He's a really weird arm. There was a ton of discussion around fastball shape with this guy, like to the point where I just think we were way overthinking it. I think he's pretty filthy. And I get that it's not. One thing I'll say from a high level, some of these guys we're looking at, people love like Ceres' stuff model on Fangraphs and like other stuff models that are out there. Generally prize like vertical movement, hard fastballs, get some ride. It's funny to me that now in this class we have guys who have like run, like Ricky Tiedemann, who we're going to talk about. It's like a running fastball from a lefty slot. Skeens is like 6'4", thrown from almost a complete sidearm angle, getting like a running four seam. And it's funny to me that like now we have to figure out how to value these odder pitches. And like you look at a Jackson Jobe, and that's like kind of your classic carry 96, and you're like, I like that guy because it's something I understand and recognize. Whereas Skeens is like, I don't know. I had a tough time finding direct comps for the shape on the four seam. The one I came down on is like it's Emerson Hancock, but it's like plus like 7 miles per hour. So like if you're doing that, if you're adding 7 miles per hour to a pitch, like is that even really a comp to Emerson Hancock? So he throws the four seam. He's got to sink off there, and he's got to change up. The interesting thing I found in looking at his low A data and double A data is that at LSU, he was throwing like a big sweeper. And when he got into the low minors, he started mixing in more of what you'd call in that like cutter slider territory. It's got a little bit of lift on it. And he was actually throwing it to righties a good amount of the time, which surprised me because I would generally think that you're throwing sweeper to righties off that running four seam. But that's what I have as his mix, that breaking ball territory and what he does with the slider, the cutter, whatever I guess you call it a slider, even though I don't think people like that word. But besides the point, I had to get a slider mentioned in here at some point. So he throws that. It's got a little bit of lift and it works. But to righties, I was surprised he was throwing it. I don't know if it was just something he was working on, such that it made its way into his repertoire. And they were like, throw it a little more. We know you still have the sweeper, etc. But he's weird. He mixes his spot on the rubber based on handedness. It's a really weird horizontal angle. He's a big dude throwing from a sidearm slot. I think that messes some things up. He's low extension too, but he's funky. I think it's just a look that no one's seen. It's going to take a while for people to adjust to. And I'd like to think of command at a given velocity interval as opposed to saying he has good command generally. And I think for throwing 98 plus, like he has pretty good command. And I think that could be partially the game changer here that negates some of the fact that the stuff isn't like 97 with carry. So that's my take on him.
Jack, go ahead, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on Paul Skeens.
Yeah, I remember watching him in the College World Series at LSU and thinking like he's going to be in the big leagues by 2025. He's a special arm. He's probably the best arm the Pirates have had in the organization since Garrett Cole, unless I'm forgetting someone. And looking at their rotation going into 2024, there isn't a whole lot that really excites me. And I think that before long, the Pirates are going to have to probably force him up just to have some guy up there to eat innings that is capable of getting big league hitters out. Like Lance said, the fastball is legit. I really like his slider and changeup. I think they're underrated compared to the fastball. And I'm looking at the Pirates big league rotation right now, like there's not a whole lot of guys there that I think are going to be able to get guys out consistently. So I think the Pirates are going to be forced to call him up maybe a little earlier than they wanted to. I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the bigs by like mid-June, early July.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. He's more than ready. I don't think there's any denying that. I think that Lance is right. The fastball shaped narrative became really an interesting conversation piece this past year around the draft time. And if you just watch him pitch, like he's insanely nasty. I was able to get one of his starts live at LSU. It was a rain shortened start, unfortunately, at South Carolina. They had a lightning delay for an hour and a half. He pitched 3 innings, but it was enough to see like, man, this guy's spectacular. I mean, the results show themselves. He had a 1.69 ERA across 122 collegiate innings, which is wild. I mean, he was an absolute workhorse, like going 120 pitches in starts. And I'm actually shocked that the Pirates threw him at all last year. Everybody kind of freaked out about the 1AA or the 2AA starts, I guess. He allowed 4 earned over 2 2/3. But again, we're talking about a guy who was coming off a stretch run where he had thrown over 100 pitches in his final 4 collegiate starts and threw 120 twice in those final 4. The shapes, I'm not particularly worried about, because while Lance mentioned, you know, the fastball shape, the ride not typically being there, kind of a dead zone shape, but he's averaging 98 typically, or like reaching 100 pretty regularly, and he commands it so well. Jack, you brought up the changeup. He didn't throw the changeup very often. I do think it's a really good pitch as well. Averaged like 17 inches of fade this past year when he did throw it, which is pretty wild. And the cutter, the slider, I think the arsenal is completely there, and he commands the pitches extremely well. Obviously, Paul Skeens is a name that we all know, but where should you take him? His ADP on NFBC is at 412 right now, which I find pretty interesting. He's got a pretty wide range, though, ranging from 187 to 477. So sitting more in that 400 range, but obviously he's going pretty high in some drafts. He has some believers. Where would you be comfortable taking Paul Skeens in a redraft league?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is the part of the year, if you're drafting right now, I just finished up my first like NFBC 50 just to kind of get an idea where ADP was and stuff. And Skeens, I think, went inside 200. And I was a little surprised. I was waiting a little bit longer on him just because I liked some of the arms around there. And I think that's the main thing, is like thinking of your format and thinking of the arms that he's going around. I feel like I oftentimes just get jumped on prospects because it only takes one person in a 12 or 15 person draft to like a player enough to vault him up. So I tend to wait on those guys and maybe take the one that isn't as popular, like a Job. I didn't get Job in this most recent draft I did, but he was a name that I think was in play probably about 120 picks later. And I know that Tigers rotation is perhaps a little deeper, but I like him, and I didn't mind him as like a 4th bench SP in like a draft and hold. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm the person to talk to this, because I tend to always get jumped on these guys. I'm always waiting, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I can get him in another round, and then I never get him because there's always someone higher than me. So I'd say right now it's tough. I think he's going to get really pushed up, especially as he has a good spring. So if you like want to share Paul Skeens and you're in a draft, I would take him right now, maybe like right at ADP, and then wait, because eventually if he shows up in spring and he looks good, you're going to get the buzz of like, oh, maybe he breaks camp, and then the ADP is going to skyrocket off that.
Yeah, I filtered it by just draft champions, and over the last month, he's actually up to 340. So you're right. That's probably going to climb. Yeah, especially we see him pitch in spring training. He looks good. Like that stock's going to soar. So I think you're right. I think if you want him, you got to get him now. Let's move to the next name. Lance, you kind of already mentioned a little bit about Ricky Tiedemann, Toronto Blue Jays, kind of a funky low release point, but incredible arm, has dealt with some injuries. But what do we think about Ricky Tiedemann?
Yes, very similar shape to Skeens, actually, just from the left side, especially from the velo perspective. He throws really hard. It's a really low slot. This is like kind of, I don't want to say it's Chris Saley, but it kind of reminds me of that in terms of the fastball shape he's actually getting. Slider, huge sweeper off that. It's like 84 with like over 15 inches of sweep to it. It's a nasty pitch. And then change up off that. The nugget here that I find interesting is that he has a lot of arm slot variation between what he throws. This is something that I think the Welsh brought up a couple times, and then I saw the data, and it's a big differential, especially between the four seam and the changeup. I think you generally see a lot of guys dropping slightly on their sweeper. I don't think it matters too much. But the changeup angle is interesting. I thought it reminded me a little, if you look at the major league level in terms of that differential, which is almost around a half a foot which is large. The only other comp's kind of Bryce Miller. And we've seen this offseason that Bryce Miller is kind of going towards a splitter. My theory on that splitter, although I haven't seen release point information on it, is that he's trying to match his fastball slot a little better. So I really like him, but I think that's an interesting problem to have. I'm not sure if it's good or bad per se. There's a lot of talk as to like whether hitters can actually pick up those differentials. You probably need to get just beyond that 6-inch window for it to be apparent. But I've watched some of his starts, and I'm not watching from the hitter perspective, so perhaps that changes some things. I'm watching from the game cam perspective. But I feel like at times you could kind of pick up when he's going to off speed, when he's going to change up. But at the same time, the stuff is so good that I don't know if that matters, right? Like it raises the stuff question of like, are we trying to build the best stuff regardless of matching slot such that it all kind of looks the same, or are we just trying to build the best stuff? And I think that's a question that I've asked some people, especially in the Mariners organization, because they're a team that really likes that low slot sweeper. And I've gotten varying responses on. And I think at the end of the day, their org is a little more like, we don't really care. We just want the best stuff. And then if you look at a team like maybe the Dodgers, they're a little different. I think they like the ability to kind of match everything in the same area and hold fastball line and stuff. So that's all to say, like, I think Tiedemann has a little more reliever risk than some of these other guys we're going to talk about. He's been coddled a little in terms of how much he's thrown too. I think he had like a bicep problem that I don't think he's amassed more than 40 innings at a given level, or maybe even 30. So I like him. I think I might be slightly lower on him than market. So I don't think I'm going to end up with him in most redraft formats, but I'm curious on what Jack thinks.
Yeah, I like Ricky a lot. My biggest concerns with him is kind of what you mentioned, his durability. He only threw 60 innings last year, and he looked okay in the AFL, but 60 innings is a huge red flag for me going into this year. His other red flag for me is his command. In his 11 starts at Double-A, like 5.63 walks per 9. That's a major red flag for me. I'm a little scared of that. His ADP right now, I think I saw it was like in just under 500, like 486. I'm pretty comfortable with him in that range because I think he will probably get some MLB innings in 2024. Alek Manoah is still a huge question mark at the bottom of that Blue Jays rotation. So if you're high on Tiedemann, I'm personally not as high as a lot of other people are. I'm comfortable taking him in the 486 range. Anything higher than that, I think, is a bit of a reach, though.
Yeah, so his recent ADP's also moved up like Skeens. Draft champions the last month, 368. So that's a big movement forward, which is pretty interesting. I guess there's people that are thinking that there's a shot that he could break camp. And maybe, just maybe, the Blue Jays say, if he's healthy in spring training, hey, let's just push this guy to the majors because, they don't want to, they've run severe injury risk with him and they just want to see what they've got at least. Now, you mentioned the innings, the durability. Prior to the AFL, the first time he had completed, or the last time he had completed 5 innings was July 1st of 2022. So it had been nearly a year and a half since Ricky Tiedemann had thrown 5 innings. He did it several times in the AFL. He threw 75 pitches, 5 innings, which was encouraging. The stuff is good. We've talked about that. I mean, the fastball, really unique. I think he gets some really good arm side runs, been up to 99. You see the sweeper generates up to like 20 inches of sweep at times. It's really nasty. The changeup goes the opposite way up to 20 inches. Like that's a huge amount of separation that he gets between those two pitches. And you really like to see that. For me, the injury risk and the durability concerns are too high to take in redraft this year. Like we've just seen the inability to throw innings. There's some underlying injury issues that I'm just worried about. And I'm not sure I'm willing to invest in Ricky Tiedemann in a redraft league this year. We'll see. Hopefully he stays healthy because the stuff is special. And I do believe in the talent, but you got to factor in injuries and durability. But this next guy, also in the AFL this year, they dueled off in a game, which was incredible. That's Jackson Jobe of the Detroit Tigers, who had an incredible leap this year, especially with command. Always had the stuff. He was a two-way guy in high school. He played shortstop. He was converted to a pitcher. Just had a ton of raw stuff, but he has just grown by leaps and bounds. And what he did last year was pretty stellar. So I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on him. Lance, what do you think about Jackson Jobe?
Yeah, Jobe is definitely a guy that I think is in consideration to be the top pitching prospect in baseball. I think Skeens has that title on most lists. I think there's some people who probably play around some other names, but yeah, Jobe's interesting. The biggest thing with Jobe is that he had a curveball for, I believe, most of his amateur career and even into his first taste pro ball. And I think at the end of this most recent season and then into the AFL, we saw him split that a bit. We saw him split it into more of like a true cutter that actually I think is one of his better pitches. It's like 90 miles per hour and it averages like 4 or 5 inches of glove side movement, which is most cutters that are up around 90 are kind of more riding that vertical line as opposed to getting some glove side. And then he also has a sweeper off that. He's like a spin monster. Everything's like 2,800 plus RPM. He's nasty. Like I think he's really safe from like a what is the mix perspective. The stuff outputs I've seen from like Eno's model for AAA look really strong, and it's serviceable command too, where he's not like a, like Tiedemann. I think to Jack's point earlier, I think Eno's model had Tiedeman's command in like a starter two around like 85 stuff, location plus, which is like 95 is reliever territory, and he's below that. And again, that stuff takes a little bit more time to stabilize location plus specifically, but Job was, I think, up around like 98 or so, right? Almost at 100, and his stuff plus was like 110 or so. So I like Job a lot. I think it's a really good mix of pitches. It should work versus both handedness. It's a ton of spin. The fastball's interesting. But one thing I'll point out that I thought was odd, but again, it's the tough thing with minor league data is like they're playing with different balls all the time, such that you almost have to wait until AAA to kind of get true movement profile. And when he added that cutter, I thought I saw like an inch or two off the fastball, both arm side and vertical break. And I think that's going to cut the grade of it slightly. Despite that, everything else is probably still good enough to work. And even if the fastball comes in at more average or slightly above, as opposed to being like initially, if you look at the beginning of the year, I had it as more like plus. So if that cutter's taking a little bit away from the fastball ride, I don't think it'll kill him, but I'd love to see him come out like early next year at AAA, where I assume he'll start, and like get back to having 17 plus vertical break from his arm. I think that would really like push him over the top for me. I'm slightly concerned on like the 16 or so I saw from the vertical break standpoint in the AFL, just from like, I like good fastballs, and I think most stuff models really like good fastballs from projecting a pitcher going forward. So I like Job a lot. I think he's probably my number 2 pitching prospect in baseball behind Skeens. I just think he's filthy.
Yeah, I'm also really high on Job. Like you said, the stuff's pro ready. I think his stuff is good enough to break camp with the Tigers. My big fear with him, though, is he faced a back problem for most of the first half of the year. And back problems, I don't know, with pitchers, they always scare me. So like kind of like Tiedemann, like I like him a lot. The stuff's there, but the injury history really scares me. He's just a guy I'm probably going to stay away from. Just I'm really scared of that back thing. There's also not really a way I can see him breaking into the MLB roster this year. The Tigers have a pretty set rotation that I'm looking at right now. They've been aggressive in putting young guys in their rotation early. So there's definitely a chance he, gets promoted, but I don't know. There's too many question marks for me to really dive into him.
I think those are fair points for sure. You've seen them sign Jack Flaherty and Kenta Maeda to a rotation that already had a lot of guys that we thought were going to fill it out. So right now you have guys like Casey Mize kind of on the outside, obviously been hurt. You had Sawyer Gibson-Long, who came on really strong last year in a couple of major league starts, and like he's kind of on the outs. They have several other pitching prospects that are advanced and ready, like a Ty Madden type. So I am curious, what kind of run does he get? This rotation doesn't have the best track record of injury history in themselves, so maybe he does get a shot. But right now, at least right away, it may be hard to see Job find time in the rotation, maybe by midseason, but we'll see how that shakes out. The biggest thing for me with Job was that his advancement in strike throwing. He walked 6 total batters last year across all levels, and that was 62 innings. So 6 total batters walked, pretty impressive, threw strikes at a 68% clip. And with that arsenal, like he had to make those gains with the control, and he did that with the strike throwing. So that's a big sticking point for Job for me. The arsenal, really good. The injury history, worrisome. The spot in the rotation for 2024, I think is still to be determined. So, I think that there's risk and rewards here when we're looking at Jackson Job. This next guy, I'm really curious to hear Lance's thoughts, especially working closely with Chicago, and that's Cade Horton, who I absolutely love. I have Cade Horton as my top pitching prospect. From what I saw this year when he was in Myrtle Beach, he was just absolutely stellar in the progress that he made all year. And talking to some guys in the Cubs organization, I was just thoroughly impressed. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Cade Horton and what we think for Redraft League from all of us.
Yeah, they love him internally. I think he's a guy. I think we're getting now, like, between Job and Horton, I think we're getting into the guys that maybe I don't know necessarily know if they apply a ton to redraft. They're just the guys I think you need to know about going into the season such that you're kind of aware of them and know, like, I'm really short on pitching and now we're in June. It's like maybe this guy's a chance to come up in July. Maybe I stash right now and try to beat the waivers on him in any of your leagues or something like that. I think Horton maybe gets like 60 to 80 innings at the major league level. It depends a little on whether the Cubs, I think, sign another pitcher. Horton, I think, is more like the results guy, I would say, from this pitching prospect landscape. Whereas, like, we were talking about all these guys like Tiedemann and Job having injuries, concerns. Like, Skeens even has like a slightly checkered history in terms of injuries, but he looks like a horse because he's huge. And he was throwing a bunch of pitches at LSU and whatnot. But Horton is the guy that's coming off TJ. So you hope that there's kind of nothing there that lingers beyond that. But he's cut ride, so he throws like 95 plus. But I don't want to say it's Tyler Glasnow. I actually think the comp here is Tanner Bybee. Very, very close from a couple perspectives. First being that cut ride on the four seam. Second being that he throws a sweeper from a slightly elevated arm angle. So think of like Nick Pivetta, where he's a little more over the top. He's able to get a little carry. He has a sweeper last year, and that pitch, as I saw in some charts that was on PitchCon yesterday, was really good. I think Nick tweeted him out too. But that kind of idea of like higher arm angle, let me throw a sweeper off it, is I think one of the reasons why that Cade Horton sweeper is so effective overall. It's a nasty pitch. It's also new for him, which is crazy to me that he has the ability to put it in zone. I think the in zone data I had on it was around 50%, which is really strong for a slider because it actually is able to generate swing and miss in zone. I think that's also a byproduct or part of the reason why he's got a really good ability to throw strikes, and he had such good results. I just think he's one of those guys who's just way too advanced for the levels he was at. That's why he jumped pretty quick. But yeah, the question for him, I think, is what he's doing with a changeup. I talked to him a little in South Bend when he was there, and he was playing around with like the Kevin Gossman grip. He's got slightly smaller hands. He's a slightly smaller guy. So I have heard that is something that doesn't preclude you to throwing splitters. And yet I see like Mark Leiter Jr. who has super tiny hands, throw a nasty split. So what do I know? But Horton's a guy who I think they're going towards more that Gossman grip. In the second half, when he adjusted to that, I think this was August or so, that pitch graded out much better. It was separating off the fastball vertically more, and I think it held velocity too, which is one of the key points. But that pitch is kind of the one that I'm interested to see what happens with it, because if you look at Bybee, he's got a pretty advanced changeup. I think that was one of the reasons why he's a pretty good plug-and-play guy. His changeup separates like horizontally, whereas we often think of changeup separating either velo or vertically. And that's kind of the range I think they want to get Horton into, is just like get something moving arm side, get something moving away from lefties. And I don't necessarily even know if he needs it, because he also has a curveball off that, which is pretty good for lefties. So I'm more wondering whether long-term they ever give him some kind of sinker to run in on righties. Because if you think of like curveball, sweeper, cut ride, like everything is outer third versus righties. And I do think the advanced hitters will kind of jump on that a little more and just sit out over the plate, and maybe some things will underperform in the majors. But again, like, I trust what the Cubs do from a pitching perspective. I think they're on the up and up. We've seen that with Craig Breslow going to the Red Sox and being in demand. So I like Horton a lot. I don't think he's my top, but we'll go to Jack. But I'm curious on why you have him as your top, Chris, after Jack responds.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris. I think he's my number 2, just right behind Skeens, and I think he probably has the highest floor of any of the guys we're talking about. I think that he's the safest bet to actually contribute at the MLB level. There's not a whole lot of question marks that I have around him. The only one I do have is that I don't know how many innings he's going to get for the Cubs this year. The Cubs are flush right now with good pitchers. I wouldn't say elite pitchers, but
yeah,
their rotation's pretty set. Like Hendricks and Wicks are going to be at the bottom of that rotation next year. They just signed Shota. Jamison Tyone's still there. Steele's coming off a great year. And then you've got to find innings for Wisniewski. Ben Brown's also on the cusp of coming up. So my only fear with Horton is this: I just don't know how much he's going to play for the big league club. He can and he will be a player in that rotation before long. I don't know when it's going to be or how aggressive the Cubs are going to be with his promotion.
Yeah, so I tend to agree, especially after the Shota signing, where you certainly don't see as many innings right now in that rotation, but it's highly possible. Horton did throw 88 and a third last year, which was pretty solid considering coming off an injury. And he's such an interesting player, like such a great athlete to me. He's highly athletic on the mound. And Lance, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they kind of slow played the develop, or like him throwing that changeup. I know the second half he altered with the grip, but also the curveball was kind of a pitch that they kind of slow played and he started introducing more throughout the year. Because when I saw him early on in Myrtle Beach, it was more just like the fastball slider, and he was occasionally mixing in a changeup. But I was told by one of a Cubs internal scout, that he was talking to me at one of the games I saw in Columbia, and he was talking about how they were kind of specific about when they wanted Horton to throw that changeup. Like it was just really specific spots and counts. And then as the season went on, we saw him throw it more, and we really saw the results. For me, like I have him as the top guy in a top tier. So like I have several of these guys all in this one tier, but Horton's athleticism on the mound and what he showed coming off of TJ, I thought was pretty stellar with the mid-90s fastball. We saw him get up to 99, gets a ton of swing and miss with that. The slider's pretty nasty pitch with the sweeping action and some depth to it as well. And I thought just the development of the changeup or the split change really has the ability to take him to the next level if he can continue to refine that. You mentioned, the hand size and those things which are question marks. But I think that with the curveball too, I think there's at least 4 above average or better offerings here, with the slider fastball arguably in plus. And I think that changeup could further develop too. And so I love the upside. I love the strike throwing ability too. We saw him throw strikes at a 66% clip, which I was pretty impressed by, especially for somebody that we hadn't seen pitch a ton in college due to injuries and other things. So to throw strikes at that rate and have the kind of arsenal that he does, he just firmly fits in that top tier of guys. And for me, like, I guess one of the advantages, I've seen him live a couple times. And so that just stands out in my mind. I'm like, man, this guy, I think, could be really special, which is why I had Horton number 1 for me. All right. So we have one. Oh, go ahead if you have something else to add.
I was just going to say quickly, there's a fun point there. You mentioned like slow playing pitches. I know the Cubs internally, and this is like, a question like how you develop pitchers, but the Cubs like not giving guys their entire repertoire early in the year. A good example is Danny Palencia, who was a starter at the beginning of last year. Maybe I'm mixing up my seasons, but he threw literally like 85% four-seam fastball for the month of April. And I was like, what is going on? You know what I mean? And then like eventually they brought in other pitches. It's an interesting theory. Like I've heard from some other orgs that they don't really care about that, and they'd rather just have the guy develop the pitch early because like they don't really care about success in the minors. I think the Cubs are a little more like, we want you to have confidence in success in the minors, and if that means throwing 1 or 2 pitches and really honing them, go for it. And it's a great question as to like, does just throwing a pitch more create more command of that offering? I think my theory is that it does initially, and then it plateaus really hard. So like, it's really interesting debate. This is getting off topic, but it's an interesting one to consider, like when you bring in pitches to a guy's repertoire. So I don't necessarily know what the answer is. I don't think there is an answer, but to your point on Horton, I think that was pretty deliberate, as that scout told you. Yeah,
and as we see other orgs, the Braves did this with AJ Smith-Shawver too. He was a 4-pitch guy out of high school. They completely scrapped the changeup and curve the first year, and we're just going to develop the fastball slider like Spencer Strider did. And then they eventually worked that in. We saw the curve more this year and some more change. So that was kind of a slow play. So we do see orgs do that, and I think that's interesting. Not sure there's a right or wrong way to do it, but it is something interesting to consider at least. This next guy we have seen debut. He's a bigger pitching prospect name and the last of our, quote, big names to talk about here before we kind of dive into some deeper targets, and that's Kyle Harrison of the San Francisco Giants. So we'll go around. We'll talk about him. Lance, you can go first. Kind of give your thoughts and whether he is a pitcher to target for redraft or not.
Yeah, I actually didn't have his ADP or what pitchers were going around him right now, but I did want to take a peek at that quick. Probably something to discuss, given he's a guy that I think will probably be in this rotation to start the year. So this is a little more like a prospect that will give you innings from the jump. The grades on him weren't great last year. I think there was that one start against the Reds that I actually rewatched a little, and he was like, I remember writing that up for my Substack, and like he dominated in that outing. And that was like okay, maybe there's something here, like the fastball up is really good. He got the Reds to swing at it. I think that might just be more so a lesson in like those blip starts. You need to see multiple of them before you can actually totally buy in. Even if you thought the game plan and execution were really good, like a lot of the time you might just run into a team that didn't think he was going to elevate forcing that much and like just had no shot. He's a VAA guy, which I know a lot of people totally love, but I don't necessarily think the forcing like grades out super, super well in models, like he's like thrown from almost like I think he's around like a 5-foot flat release, right? Which is like almost about a whole foot below league average. And he gets an okay amount of ride for it, like it's so hard when you're that I can't do it here, but like when you're throwing like this, like you can't orient your wrist up to get carry on a ball. This is why like a guy like Josh Hader is so deceptive. So like you're not looking at like massive deviations around like 13 or 14 inches of that induced vertical break from that low of a slot. But despite that, he has such a flat approach. It works. I think it could work. I'm not totally convinced the rest of the repertoire is like built properly. Like, and this isn't a knock on the Giants or anything. Nothing really grades out super well. Like the sweeper slurvy thing that he throws is like bridging between a curve and a slider. I don't necessarily know if it's working. So I'm curious to see whether that's just a pitch they've stuck with because he's comfortable with, but like the results there haven't been great, and his command is like fine. So I don't know. If you're telling me this guy doesn't have like great command, I just want better stuff. And like maybe stuff models aren't capturing how flat the approach is, but I don't think that necessarily like makes him a great pitching prospect just because it's flat. Like I think we kind of get carried away with that a little, where it's like, oh, the VA is flat, and it's like, all right, was it 4? Is it -4 degrees, or is it like 4.8? Like I don't know. Like just tell me the vertical break in the velo. I could give you like a stuff model that like pretty clearly is going to predict what the quality of that pitch is going to be. But I like the fastball. Like I think it works. I've hesitated on him, and I maybe am swayed here strongly by what some of the stuff grades currently are in the models I've seen, and like watching him pitch, and like the fact that he's so dependent, I think, on team approach and hitter approach to him, that I hesitate a little bit on him. But again, I want to know the price of the pitchers he's going around. I don't have that off the top of my head. That might be more of a fun debate to kind of figure out whether you take him or pitcher XYZ.
Yeah. So over the last month in Draft Champions, going at pick 273, which is a good bit higher than some of the other guys we've discussed. But again, we did see Harrison in the majors likely to start.
He's guaranteed innings too.
Yeah. So some other guys in this range that are interesting, like you have Marcus Stroman, a completely different kind of pitcher. You have Reese Olson, Griffin Canning, Cutter Crawford, Nestor Cortez, like those types of arms, which are pretty interesting, like all kind of different arms. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, do you like the safety of what Stroman brings, like as a pitch to contact guy, or like, do you rather bank on the upside of Kyle Harrison? Would you rather take a chance on Reese Olson or Kyle Harrison? And those are some interesting things to talk about. I know I would take Nestor Cortez over him in a heartbeat. That ADP seems really nice on Nestor if healthy, but I'm curious what you guys think about the ADP. And Jack, then you can dive in a little bit on Harrison.
Yeah. Excuse me. I really like Harrison's potential for next year. He's going to probably be the third arm in that rotation right now for the Giants. I think they're going to add another arm at some point, either by trade or free agent, because there's still a couple holes there. But I mean, he's going to get innings. His command looks good when he came up last year. He's a strikeout guy. His potential is, I mean, he could be like a fourth starter pitcher for you. And like you said, he's probably got the highest ceiling of anyone you mentioned in that draft range. So this is someone I'm going to be targeting. I really like Harrison, especially at that value.
So an interesting point with Harrison, and it was discussed like with the walk rates and stuff, is that we saw the AAA leagues use the ABS system, but it was split like first half of the week being full ABS, and then the second half of the week being the challenge system. And so I actually broke it down because I've seen a lot of discussion on this, and his walk rates were almost identical for both. So like his starts that were the weekend that were the challenge system, and the walks from the ABS. So, that is an interesting point. Like the command and control are a little bit worrisome for me. Obviously, we saw the walk rate improve pretty substantially in the majors, and I'm curious if that can stick. But I do think there's some interesting things to point out, like Lance did so well with his stuff. And is it going to play? The fastball is really interesting. You mentioned the really low release spot. It's getting as much ride or as much horizontal movement as it does ride. So that's also interesting. The slurve's interesting to me. And, he's mixing the changeup in about 10, 11% of the time. So I don't know. Harrison's one to watch. I'm not sure. I still think there's more development that needs to be had. And maybe that happens. It's happened this offseason. Maybe it happens this year. But at that price tag, he does offer some upside, but I'm not sure I'm willing to invest there, just given some other arms around him that may be a little safer. All depends on how your team build is and what you want to do there. So those are some of the big names we were going to discuss. We were all going to hit on some deeper targets, kind of go through individually, and just talk about some guys that we think can be redraft relevant that aren't, quote, like the top pitching prospects in baseball. So we're just going to kind of do a roundtable. We each have two names to discuss. And we'll start with Jack. You have your first name on the list. Who is that, and why are they a target for you for redraft?
Sure. Yeah, my first name is Joe Boyle. the righty from Oakland. He broke in at the rotation towards the end of the year. He was absolutely lights out, sub-2 ERA, really good stuff, really nice fastball, really solid slider that works really well against right-handed hitters. His fastball's up above 100 miles an hour. I will say I'd like to see him add another like dominant pitch. He threw a curveball, I think about 10% of the time off the top of my head, but it wasn't great. And I think if he truly wants to take another step, he has to add a third pitch that can generate more swing and misses. But his numbers looked great last year. I think he's probably going to hold down another spot in the A's rotation that isn't super talented, doesn't have a whole lot of high-end talent. His current ADP has him in like the 575 range, which I think is great value for a guy that's going to maybe give you 15 to 20 starts and at a pretty high level. So yeah, Joe Boyle's guy I'm targeting. Looks like an absolute beast. Had a breakout season last year. I hope he can have another one this year.
Yeah, Boyle's pretty interesting from the standpoint of we know he's going to pitch. Oakland just doesn't have much else to offer. So he's pretty much a shoe-in to start, like as long as he's healthy and, being serviceable at least. He also made some really interesting like walk rate gains, like when he came over to Oakland, which I'm not sure will be sticky or not. But as you mentioned, I think the stuff can play. And if somehow the control sticks, then he's a pretty interesting arm to me, especially at the cost being much lower. Over the last month in draft champions leagues on FBC, going right around pick 450. So to me, that there's some really good value to be had there, especially so late in a draft. It's, if you're in a 30 round like fab league, that's like your last pick. If it doesn't work out, you drop him. Like you have those roster spots you need to churn anyway. So I think it's worth a play there. I do think that's a really good pick. Lance, who was your first pick for a deeper target?
Yeah, I'm going pretty off the board here. I don't know if a lot of people know who Jared Jones is, but he's a right-handed pitcher for the Pirates, AAA. This is I'd say it's purely almost a stuff play, but he threw like 80 or so innings. Yeah, 82 innings at AAA. Has like 120 between AA and AAA last year. Really good at AA, jumped up to AAA, had like a 4.70 ERA, but both those levels he was sub 4 FIP. So like he probably ran into a little bit of luck. Everything grades out pretty solid here. He's got like 3-4 pitches that are all right in that area of being slightly kind of above average, which I like just from a projectability standpoint of like, give me some innings and give me innings where you're not going to have a massive risk of a blowout. The fastball's good. It's like 96 plus. It's not like crazy in shape or anything. It's just, it's a pretty standard repertoire. He's got a changeup off it, kind of more of like a gyro slider. And then his curveball's a little bit in that death ball territory where it's not really sweeping. It's not really dropping a ton. It's kind of just lingering with a little bit of that downward vertical break. But everything there is like from the models I've seen, like he's right around like 100 to, he's got like 3 pitches or 4 pitches that I think are all 100 stuff plus or better. He's going, I actually didn't think he was going so close to Joe Boyle. I do like Joe Boyle a lot. I think that was a great get by Jack there in terms of picking him. Jared Jones is going like 498 and he's lasted until like 591 in some drafts. So this is definitely a name like deep draft and hold. You're looking at pitchers that are just like, you're like, I don't know if this guy's ever going to be put into my starting rotation. Whereas like a guy like Jared Jones, I get that Pittsburgh has options, right? But like, I'm not totally convinced that any of those options are better than Jared Jones. JT Brubaker, Braley Falter, Marco Gonzalez went to Driveline, but like, we'll see. Quentin Priester and Martin Perez, like, I don't know. Like, you got like 5 of the 7 names there that I'm not totally convinced are like good or going to give you better than like a 4 or 5 ERA. So like, if I'm the Pirates at some point here, like if Jared Jones comes out and looks good, like I don't know why you wouldn't give him a shot. So I'd love to see him get like 100 innings or more at the major league level. We'll see if that actually happens. Maybe they just hold him down in April and then like, we'll see. Maybe they run into injuries. Maybe he breaks camp. But he's late enough right now where I like him as like as a late stash. He's not as guaranteed on the inning side as a Joe Boyle, but he feels like a guy that I think out the gate when you get like the public stuff plus on him, people are going to be in on him as like a no name that is reasonably interesting. So I went like super deep target here, but I think he's got the stuff to play at the major league level. So I guess we'll see how many innings he gets.
Yeah, I mean, he threw 82 innings already in AAA, and that's back-to-back seasons of at least 120 plus innings in the minor leagues. Jared Jones is a completely different pitcher this year. I saw him a good bit in Greensboro in 2022, and his stuff did not sustain throughout starts. He was throwing 4 innings. The stuff was diminishing in the third. And I was like, man, this guy's a surefire reliever. And then this year, completely different arm. The velo held throughout starts. He was going 6 innings, like all things you want to see, and the stuff sustaining, which was huge for him. So I do like that pick a lot. I'm really big on Jared Jones. I think he's a great target too in redraft leagues, because you mentioned several factors, and one being those guys in the Pirates rotation. Jones is better than pretty much all of them. So there's no reason he shouldn't get innings. My next pick is interesting because I don't know how many innings this guy will get, but it's Hurston Waldrop, who was the Braves' first round pick last year. And you look at what Atlanta's done in bringing in Chris Sale to a rotation that already has Strider, Fried, and Morton. And you're like, well, there's no way these prospects are going to find a way into the rotation. But I will say there's a reason the Braves held on to Hurston Waldrop and AJ Smith-Shawver this offseason. That's because they really believe in both these guys. And to get like a Dylan Cease type, they would have had to give up at least one of those. So they went out and got Sale. It didn't cost them the arm. But while this rotation on paper looks pretty good, I think there's some severe injury risk with all these guys. You have Charlie Morton, who's over 40 now. You have Chris Sale, who has not logged consistent innings since 2019. You have Bryce Elder, who did log innings, but he had an ERA north of 5 in the second half, just completely fell off. And I think there's opportunity here for a Hurston Waldrop to step into an Atlanta rotation as an already pretty advanced arm. So down the stretch last year, he was obviously drafted last summer. He made it to AAA, but there was some pretty serious rumors that he was going to be called up the last week of the season and be on the Braves postseason roster, which just shows you how they think about him. The stuff is really good. If you look at the results at Florida, which I probably wouldn't as much, because Florida does really weird things with their arms. When he was behind in counts, he threw the fastball like 70% of the time. And the fastball is fine, but we know that Hurston Waldrop's bread and butter is that splitter. I mean, it's just an absolutely nasty pitch that has insane traits and characteristics that I really believe could step in and be one of the best, splitters in baseball right away. And the fastball is pretty good in itself. It's not, if you look at it metrically, it's fine. It doesn't like jump off the page at you. But at Florida was, set 95, close to 16 inches of induced vertical break. So slider, pretty solid pitch as well. And we saw the Braves kind of tweak with the pitch usage and repertoire last year, and the results showed. From people that pitched from the draft last year, I think Waldrop was the best arm. Obviously, several guys didn't pitch. Skeens didn't throw a lot, but Waldrop just moved quick and showed that he was ready. I do think there's opportunity for 80 to 100 innings here, and he's going right in the same range of these guys we've been talking about. He's actually going right behind Jared Jones over the last month at pick 477, Jared Jones at 475, and we mentioned Joe Boyle at 450. So all these guys being later targets that could potentially return some investment. Now, Waldrop's probably I would say the least safe to throw innings, but knowing how Atlanta values him, I wouldn't be shocked at all if we see him in the second half, making him a good target, and especially draft and hold leagues, because you can slot him in. Somebody gets hurt, he jumps in when he's ready and in the majors. So that's why I really like Waldrop. Jack, we'll go back to you for your second pick. Who is that guy?
Yeah, can I jump in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious, Chris, are you concerned on the command there at all? Because I've watched some of his starts and he sprays the ball a ton.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether he becomes a guy that comes up and everyone's excited about, and then he goes in that Shawver role where it's like starter pen, and that is just, and for fantasy, I hate those guys. I'd rather just take Jared Jones, even if he's giving me like a 4.2 ERA. Are you concerned on that command with Waldrop at all?
Yeah, I think it's certainly something to be concerned about. We saw the strike rates be pretty inconsistent throughout his time in college and even professionally, and command being different than control. But the ability to command the pitch and throw them where he wants to is a question. The strike rates were serviceable. They were about, throughout the minors last year, close to average, kind of fluctuated depending on the level. But yeah, I think the command is the biggest question mark here. And I hope that they don't throw him in that Shawver role you mentioned of back and forth. That's good for nobody, for fantasy managers, even the pitcher themselves. They need to just pick one and develop him. I think that the Braves are pretty intent on continuing to develop him as a starter, and I hope that will be the case. Whether that be continue to develop in AAA or whatever it may be. I don't want to see him bouncing back and forth in the pen in Atlanta, back starting in AAA. That would probably be the worst case scenario. And I do think that's a legitimate question mark to have. And hopefully we see some strides made with that, because I do think that's probably the biggest determinant of Hurston Waldrop for me.
Yeah.
All right, Jack, we'll jump in. Go ahead with your next guy.
Yeah, my second name, I clearly have a type. I love tall right-handed pitchers. And My second name is Jacob Misiorowski out of the Brewers. He's got pro-ready arsenal, 100-mile-an-hour fastball, 94-mile-an-hour cutter, 87-mile-an-hour slider. All look really good. All could be plus pitches. The main concern with him is just his durability. He got shut down last year due to some arm fatigue, so he only threw about 60 innings. But I'm looking at the Brewers organization right now, and there isn't a whole lot of good high-level starting pitching outside of Corbin Burns and Freddie Peralta. They've got Robert Gasser in AAA, who will probably make the jump up to the MLB this year. But I think Misiorowski's a guy that if he can build on his durability and give you 120, 130 innings, he's a guy that can slot into that Brewers rotation and make an impact immediately in 2024. Obviously, that's a big question mark. He probably is the highest risk of anyone we've talked about so far, in my opinion, because there's a big risk that he just stagnates in AAA or the arm durability isn't there. But if he puts it all together, Misiorowski's the guy that could be at the top of that Brewers rotation post Burns and Peralta.
Yeah,
Misiorowski's filthy.
Oh yeah, crazy good stuff.
I love watching him. Yeah, that's a great pick there. Yeah, he's super funky. He's like 6'7". Talking about like he's like the Yuri Perez syndrome. I don't know if that's a problem, but like he's really tall and then he throws from this wacky slide. He's got crazy like scap load when he throws. I think he's got a shot to be like absolutely just nasty. The other thing I'll mention, I feel like on a lot of these guys too, we've talked about like injury risk, and like I've been thinking a lot in like drafting and also like doing my own. I'm going to try to do my own starting pitcher prospect ranks this year and stuff. And like I almost wonder whether we just take all the injuries and throw them out if we'd be better at projecting. Because like I feel like every guy has some kind of tag, and like I don't know if a back injury is worth an arm fatigue. I don't know what kind of injury it was. I almost wonder whether if I just completely didn't think about injuries or innings at all, whether I would be better at projecting prospects. I don't know the answer, but like every single guy, I'm like, oh, but he didn't do this. Oh, but he's hurt. And like every guy's got something. Like he's throwing a baseball, and he probably shouldn't be throwing the ball at a velocity he probably should be. He's probably got some risk for injury. I almost feel like I just lean towards like the Misiorowski types, because like if that guy can pitch 180 innings in the major leagues, like his fastball is just filth. Like I love it. It's just so filthy. Even if the shape's not great, he's got another one of those like running fastballs. But like I think he's got a really good ability to get ahead with that too, from what I've watched of him. So like even though he's got like 5-6 walks per 9, like I think he's going to be better, especially as you get up to the catchers in the major leagues. For the Brewers are generally pretty good at stealing strikes and stuff. So I think he's filthy.
Yeah, we saw him on display in the Futures game this summer, and he absolutely was dominant. If you've never seen him, you can just go watch. You can probably find that footage pretty easily. But yeah, the Arsenal, very, very impressive with Misiorowski. There's obviously injury risk, but you have that with every guy, as Lance mentioned. Lance, go back to you. Your next deep league pitching target.
Yeah, we're going boring here. We're going Drew Thorpe, who's like the complete opposite of what I was just talking about. But Thorpe was traded in the Soto trade. The fastball command is for per Fangraphs is like really good, like some of the best in just command generally in the minor leagues. I think he's actually at the top of their leaderboard as of their 2023 update. So it's really good command, but oftentimes with really good command, you don't really run into amazing shapes. So the fastball here is like probably more average to slightly below in terms of shape on it. It's not that great of a pitch. He's like a higher slot guy, creates kind of a steeper VAA with it because he's not able to get a ton of carry on the pitch. But the key pitch here is the changeup. It's really weird. It's in that Lucas Giolito territory where he's thrown it with a lot of like, it has like 15 or 16 inches of vertical break from the data that I had, which is like, it doesn't even like make sense. Like I texted someone in the Yankees org about it when he was still a Yankee, and I was like, what is going on with that? Like, is that a mystery? He's like, nah, that's just like, he's 4-seam oriented and he just like carries it a ton. So it's like a pure velo separator, but it's like 50% swing miss wherever, or whiffs wherever it is. And like, I think he's like a pretty high floor arm. Like, I think he's in the same area that I mentioned with Jared Jones, where like Padres don't have rotation pieces. I'm pretty confident he's going to get like 100 plus innings at the major league level. And I'm pretty confident they're going to be like sub 4-5-ish, such that he'll be serviceable, especially on a matchup basis. I know the NL West, you run some tough matchups, which might be tough from a matchup standpoint. I like want to put him in your lineup and stuff. But like, he reminds me a bit of like Lucas Giolito in the sense that like I think he could have some years where he's like really good and like sub 3.5, sub 3 ERA if the changeup works it up in the zone off the 4-seam line up. Like he's a really high floor guy. So Jack went with like the fun stuff arms, and I love stuff, but I went with the guys who are like boring, who I'm pretty sure will give me like a 4.2 ERA over 120 innings, which I think are really valuable late in drafts. So yeah, Thorpe's weird. That changeup's going to be, I think, a big topic of discussion when he comes up, because we don't really see anything like it movement profile wise, but I do think it comps to Giolito pretty well.
Yeah, Thorpe's a unique arm. That's the best way to describe it. He's a higher floor. The Padres just don't have guys in the rotation right now. You look at the rotation, you're like, why couldn't Drew plenty of time in that rotation? Quickly mention both those ADPs. Mizorowski over the last month, 555. So that's a pretty good slot if you believe in him, and Drew Thorpe at 450. So those are certainly guys to target. As we're running out of time, I'll quickly hit on my last guy. And this is kind of more of a draft champion specific target. That's Cade Cavalli, who we know had Tommy John surgery last spring. He was looking absolutely stellar in spring training last year. Before he went down with the injury, he had TJ mid-March. Things have kind of been quiet around, the recovery and such, but he began throwing in September and supposedly felt really, really good in the process. So I don't know exactly when we see Cavalli, but I'd expect that he's up in the majors in the rotation in Washington at least by midseason. And he's going so incredibly late at pick 670 that the upside, I believe, is worth a shot there in a draft champions league, because why not? Who else are you going to take there that's really worth much of anything? And Cavalli has plenty to offer. We don't know what he's going to look like, obviously, coming back from TJ, but he has shown plenty to like when healthy. The fastball set near 96, touch triple digits, throws a curve, slider, and changeup as well. The curve being his most used secondary, sitting mid 80s, a ton of vertical movement with that, slider in the upper 80s, really good horizontal movement separation between the slider and the changeup while they're in similar velocity bands. Cavalli has to be healthy. That's the biggest thing. But at pick 670, even anywhere after 600, I think that he is worth a stab there as someone who can potentially return value in the second half of the season. So hopefully we'll know more soon on him, as there's still a lot of question marks about the recovery. But I do like the arm. I love the potential as well. And we have Nick back with us to wrap up the hour.